Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to do something a little bit different. Usually, we start with a big abstract concept.
Right, like the future of work or artificial intelligence or something like that.
Exactly. But today, I want to start with something small, something entirely physical, something that, well, if you are over the age of 35, you have felt in your own body. I want to talk about your luggage.
It sounds incredibly mundane, doesn't it?
It really does.
But as we dive into the sources today, we are going to see that the history of your luggage is actually a history of human blindness.
Yeah. We are looking at a really fascinating stack of notes and research today, primarily centered around a chapter titled Lecturing Birds on How to Fly.
It's a great title.
And the author starts the whole thing with this very specific, very relatable memory. It's June 2012. He is walking through JFK Airport in the international terminal. He is pulling a suitcase behind him.
One of those modern ones, right?
Yeah, exactly. One of those modern hard shells. It has 4 wheels. It spins 360 degrees. You can basically push it with 2 fingers while you're drinking a coffee.
The kind we all completely take for granted today.
Right. But as he is walking, he looks down at those tiny little wheels, and he has this flashback. He remembers spending 3 decades, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, walking through that exact same terminal.
But hauling heavy leather bags.
Hauling heavy bags filled with hardcover books. He talks about the lactic acid building up in his arms, the numbness in his fingers.
Oh, yeah.
Where you'd have to stop every 50 yards just to put the bag down and let the blood flow back into your hands.
It is such a visceral memory. I mean, I think anyone who traveled in the 20th century remembers the luggage limp.
The luggage limp, yes.
You mean you'd walk lopsided for an entire day after a long flight.
And here's the kicker of the whole anecdote. He looks at his sleek little suitcase in 2012, and he has this realization. He thinks, I am an idiot. Or rather, we are all idiots.
Because of the timeline.
Because of the timeline. The wheel was invented in Mesopotamia. That's, 6,000 years ago?
Roughly 4,000 BC.
So we put a man on the moon in 1969.
Right.
We split the atom in the 1940s. We invented the internet, the microchip, the jet engine. And yet, putting wheels directly on the bottom of a suitcase, which is a purely mechanical, ridiculously low-tech solution, didn't become the standard until just a few decades ago.
It's wild.
Why? I mean, why did that happen? Our mission today is to explore exactly that. Why we humans lack imagination when it comes to the future, why we credit the wrong people for inventions, and how trial and error is actually a highly rational thing.
It is the ultimate paradox of innovation. We tend to assume that progress is just this straight linear line. We assume that if we can build a Saturn V rocket, we must have already figured out the optimal way to carry a box of clothes.
Right.
But we hadn't.
But wait, I want to push back on this a little bit based on the reading.
Yeah.
Because it just seems impossible. You're telling me that for 40 years, you had literally Nobel Prize winners walking through airports, physicists, the smartest people on the planet, people who understand quantum mechanics, sweating, dragging heavy bags, and none of them thought, hey, maybe I should slap some wheels on this.
That is exactly what the source material is arguing, and it highlights a very specific type of cognitive blindness. The author calls it the difference between retrospective and prospective triviality.
Okay, let's break that down for everyone listening. Retrospective versus prospective.
So retrospectively, meaning looking back from where we are today, the wheeled suitcase is utterly trivial. It's obvious. You look at it and say, of course, it's a box with wheels.
Yeah, it's so simple it feels like it always had to exist.
Exactly. But prospectively, meaning looking forward from, say, 1970 or 1980, it was completely invisible. It was a massive blind spot.
But why was it a blind spot? Was the technology just not there yet? Were the wheels too heavy back then?
No, and that's the really fascinating part of the research. The author makes it very clear. We had the wheels. We had the ball bearings, we had the smooth floors. I mean, airports have had terrazzo and linoleum for ages.
Right.
The barrier wasn't technological at all. It was psychological.
Psychological how?
It's about what our society values. The source argues that intellectual society heavily rewards difficult derivations. So if you are a brilliant physicist going to a conference to discuss Riemann's conjecture or the behavior of subatomic particles, your head is up in the clouds.
You're thinking about the complex stuff.
Right. You're thinking about the abstract, the impossible. You are absolutely not looking at the physical reality of the heavy leather bag in your hand.
So we are sort of trained to think that smart means complicated.
Precisely. Think about it. There is no Nobel Prize for simplicity.
Wow.
There is no academic tenure awarded for noticing the obvious. So you had all these brilliant minds solving the profound mysteries of the universe while totally struggling with a transport problem that a 5-year-old could have solved.
The source basically says we lack the imagination for the simple.
We do. We are constantly scanning the horizon for the next massive, complex breakthrough, and we literally trip over the simple solution sitting right in front of us.
It's like we have this built-in bias against low-tech solutions. We want our solutions to look like Star Trek, not like a little wagon.
Exactly. And the thing is, this isn't the first time this has happened in history. The suitcase is just a very relatable modern example.
Right.
If you look at the history of the wheel itself, it gets even weirder. We really need to talk about the Mayans here.
Oh man, the Mayan anomaly. This part of the research completely blew my mind.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It is, because I always learned in school that the Mesoamericans, so the Mayans, the Incas, the Zapotecs, that they simply didn't have the wheel. That it was one of the big technological reasons the Europeans were able to conquer them so easily.
That is the standard historical narrative we're all taught. But archaeologically speaking, it is completely false. They did have the wheel.
They had it.
They absolutely had it. Archaeologists have dug up Mayan artifacts that are clearly, undeniably wheels. But, and here's the massive catch, they were only used on children's toys.
Toys.
Yeah. Little clay dogs and jaguars with wooden axles and wheels meant to be pulled along by a piece of string.
Wait, so they had the actual technology. They clearly understood the mechanics of a rolling axle, but they only used it to entertain kids.
Yes. And meanwhile, right next to the kids playing with these rolling toys, you had the adults engaging in some of the most back-breaking labor in human history.
Building the pyramids.
Exactly. They were building massive stone pyramids, hauling giant limestone slabs across the rough jungle floor.
Just burning through that lactic acid we were talking about earlier.
Using logs and raw, brutal manpower.
That is just maddening to think about. You have the solution right there. The kid is literally pulling it across the dirt. Why didn't the chief architect look down and say, hey, wait a minute, if we make that little clay dog 1,000 times bigger, we can move this giant rock?
It seems so incredibly obvious to us now, but the source points out that there is often a profound mental block between a domain of play or ritual and the domain of practical utility.
They categorized it wrong in their heads.
Right. They saw the wheel as a toy. They didn't see it as an industrial tool. It's actually very similar to what happened with the Greeks.
Oh, right, the Greek steam engine.
Hero of Alexandria. He basically invented the steam engine in the 1st century AD. It was called the aeolipile.
How did it work?
It was this hollow metal sphere with bent nozzles on the sides. You heated water underneath it, steam shot out of the nozzles, and the sphere spun rapidly. It was, for all intents and purposes, a primitive jet engine.
In the 1st century AD. So why on earth didn't the Industrial Revolution happen in ancient Rome?
Because of how they used it. They used it to automatically open massive temple doors to all the worshippers.
Okay.
It was a magic trick, a religious novelty. They used it for amusement and spectacle. It took nearly 2,000 years for someone to look at that concept and say, hey, we can use this to power a mechanical loom or a train.
This brings up a concept from the source material that I found really useful. The author calls it the category of the half-invented.
Yes. The half-invented. It's such a great term.
So these are technologies that exist physically in the world, but haven't been truly seen yet. They are staring us right in the face. But the breakthrough isn't the invention of the physical object itself. It's the invention of the application.
Right. You need a visionary to cross that gap.
Like Steve Jobs and the computer mouse.
That is the perfect modern example. Xerox PRC invented the mouse and the graphical user interface, but they just sat on it.
They didn't know what it was for.
Exactly. To them, it was just a cool, obscure gizmo for computer science researchers.
And then Jobs walks in, takes one look at it and goes, this is the entire future of personal computing.
Right. Jobs didn't invent the underlying technology. He bridged the gap. He saw the dialectic, the interaction between the human hand, the images on the screen, and the machine. He moved it from half-invented to fully invented.
But, okay, the most controversial part of this whole first section, and the one that I think really challenges our modern worldview the most, is the story of the camel.
Ah, the camel versus the wheel.
Yeah. Now, this is where I actually struggled a bit with the source material at first. Because the argument presented is that in the Middle East, around the time of the Arab invasions, the wheel basically disappeared.
It did.
People completely stopped using wagons and carts, and they started using camels instead. And the source explicitly calls this progress.
It does call it progress.
But how on earth is that progress? I mean, if I sell my car today and buy a horse, everyone I know would say, I've regressed. I've gone backward in time. How is ditching the wheel for a pack animal not a total collapse of civilization?
Well, it feels like a collapse if you are only looking at the specific technology in isolation. Wheel equals sophisticated, animal equals primitive. But the source asks us to zoom out and look at the entire system. You have to think about the P&L, the profit and loss statement of running a wagon versus running a camel.
Okay, let's run the numbers on that.
Sure. To use a wheeled wagon for transport, you don't just need the wheel and the wagon. What else do you desperately need?
You need a road, a smooth, flat road.
Right. You need a road. And who builds that road?
The government, the state.
And who maintains the road? Who keeps the bandits off the road so your wagon doesn't get robbed? Who fills the potholes after a storm?
The state does, which means you need taxes to pay for it. You need a massive bureaucracy. You need an organized police force or an army.
Exactly. The wheel is actually a highly fragile technology because it relies entirely on a massive, incredibly expensive, centralized infrastructure. If that central state weakens, which happens all the time in history, the roads decay. And the moment the roads decay, the wheel becomes totally useless.
It gets stuck in the mud.
Now, look at the camel.
A camel is. What's a camel? It doesn't need much.
A camel is the ultimate off-road vehicle. It absolutely doesn't need pavement. It can walk on loose sand, sharp rock, dry scrub. It fuels itself on whatever local vegetation it finds along the way.
And it creates its own copies, right?
Baby
camels.
Exactly. And critically, from a labor perspective, one single person can manage 6 camels tied together in a caravan. A wagon usually requires at least one dedicated driver per wagon.
So the labor cost is way lower, and the infrastructure cost is literally zero.
Zero. When the old Roman roads fell into disrepair, the wheel became a massive economic liability. The camel, on the other hand, was anti-fragile. It thrived in the chaos. It didn't need a functioning tax base to operate.
Wow.
So the historical shift from the wheel to the camel wasn't a regression to the Dark Ages. It was actually a highly rational, efficient economic decision based on the environment.
That completely flips the script. We are so conditioned to think that technology always moves in one single direction, toward more complexity, more gears, more microchips.
Always forward.
Always forward. But this suggests that sometimes the better technology is the one that is more robust, even if it looks primitive to our modern eyes.
Exactly. Innovation isn't just about making new, shiny stuff. It's about finding what works best in the specific environment you're in. And sometimes the environment demands a camel, not a Ferrari.
That is a great way to put it. And this idea that we fundamentally misunderstand innovation, that we don't see the simple solution, or we completely misjudge the complex one, leads us directly into the next big section of the deep dive, the concept of the translational gap.
And this is where the material gets a little darker.
Yeah, it does.
We've been talking about suitcases and camels, which are fun intellectual curiosities. But when we start applying the same blindness to medicine, it stops being a curiosity and quickly becomes a tragedy.
So let's define it first. The translational gap is the time lag between when a formal discovery is made and when it's actually implemented and used in the real world.
Right.
And you'd think, looking around at the modern world, that this gap would be tiny now. Someone publishes a scientific paper, it gets blasted out on social media, and boom, the next day we're all using it.
You would definitely think that. But the source actually suggests the gap might be lengthening today.
Lengthening.
Yeah, because there is so much noise now. There is so much academic churning, so many papers being published just for the sake of publishing, that the actual signal, the real useful discovery, gets completely lost in the noise. But even historically, this gap has been what the author calls a history of horror.
Let's talk about Semmelweis, because you mentioned him in our pre-show notes, and reading his story in the source material, it honestly makes you want to scream.
Ignaz Semmelweis. His story is infuriating. It's the 1840s. He is a doctor working in a major hospital in Vienna, and he notices this terrifying pattern in the maternity wards. The hospital had 2 separate clinics for delivering babies.
Okay.
One clinic was run primarily by doctors and medical students. The other clinic was run by midwives.
Got it.
In the midwives' clinic, the death rate for mothers from what they called childbed fever was relatively low. It was maybe 1 or 2%.
Which was standard for the time.
Right. But in the doctor's clinic, the death rate was sometimes 10, 15, even 30%.
30%.
It was a slaughterhouse. Women literally laboring in the streets were begging on their knees not to be taken to the doctor's clinic because everyone in Vienna knew it was a death sentence.
That is horrific.
Yeah.
What was the difference? Were the doctors just terribly incompetent?
No, in their minds, they were being highly scientific. They were doing autopsies. They would spend their mornings down in the morgue dissecting corpses, learning anatomy, and then without washing their hands, they would walk right upstairs to the maternity ward and deliver babies.
Oh, God, so they were literally carrying the disease. Well, I guess they didn't know about germs yet.
Right, the germ theory of disease didn't exist yet. But Semmelweis saw this. He didn't know what a germ was, but he called them cadaverous particles. He looked at the data, he saw the undeniable correlation between the morgue and the deaths, and he implemented a very simple heuristic, a rule of thumb.
Which was just washing your hands.
Wash your hands with a chlorinated lime solution before you touch a living patient. That's it.
And what happened to the death rate?
The death rate in the doctor's clinic plummeted. It dropped to less than 1% almost instantly. It was an absolute medical miracle. He saved thousands of lives.
So logically, you look at that result, and every hospital in Europe should have adopted this the very next day.
You'd think, but instead the medical establishment absolutely destroyed him.
Why?
They were offended. There was this famous prevailing attitude. A leading obstetrician actually said, "Gentlemen's hands are clean." The very idea that a gentleman, an educated doctor, could be dirty or carrying death was socially unacceptable. It directly contradicted their prevailing theory of disease, which was based on imbalances of bodily humors and bad air or miasma.
They chose their abstract theory over the physical reality of women surviving.
They literally chose to let mothers die rather than admit their complicated theory was wrong and a simple hand-washing rule was right.
That is just, it's unbelievable what happened to him.
Semmelweis was fired from his position. He was mocked and ostracized by the medical community. He eventually had a severe nervous breakdown, was committed to an insane asylum, and died there after being beaten by the guards.
That is awful.
It took another 30 years, decades after Pasteur and Lister proved the germ theory, for basic antisepsis and hand washing to finally become the standard of care. That is the true cost of the translational gap. 30 years of unnecessary agony and death because the experts couldn't accept a simple observation that threatened their status.
And the source mentions that this blindness wasn't just limited to hand washing. It was the same story with bloodletting.
Oh, the persistence of the humors theory is absolutely baffling. Even long after William Harvey successfully demonstrated that blood continuously circulates through the body, which was in the 1620s.
Right, which makes the whole idea of draining bad humors out of the specific vein physically nonsensical.
Completely nonsensical. But doctors continued to bleed patients for centuries after that. They used leeches. They used cataplasms.
Cataplasms, I saw that word in the text. What is that?
It's essentially putting moist bread or clay directly onto an open inflammation or wound.
Moist bread on an infection.
Yes, it's the very definition of medical incompetence. But the source makes a really key distinction here that we need to highlight. It says that resisting a new technology like, say, a brand new medical device or a new experimental drug, that is actually rational caution.
Right, that makes sense. That's just basic risk management. We survived for thousands of years without this new pill. So waiting a little bit to see if it has side effects is perfectly fine. Don't be the first person to eat the newly discovered mystery mushroom.
Exactly. Skepticism of the new is healthy, but resisting the removal of something actively harmful like fighting to keep bloodletting or refusing to wash dirty hands, that is criminal incompetence. The source calls this the empty suit problem.
The empty suit problem, I wanted to dig into that. What exactly is an empty suit in this context?
The empty suit refers to the administrators, the bureaucrats, the formalists, the people who manage the system rather than the people actually doing the work on the ground. Taking a simple, effective idea and implementing it in the real world almost always involves fighting these people. Implementation is actually much harder than invention. You have to fight the hospital administrator who doesn't want to spend budget money on chlorine. You have to fight the senior department head who has built his entire 40-year career teaching the old, harmful method.
So the empty suit is the person who prioritizes the formal procedure or the institutional hierarchy over the actual real-world result.
Precisely. They care about how things look on paper, not whether the patient lives or dies. And this leads us to the core question. If the empty suits and the overly theoretical academics are so often the bottleneck for innovation, where does real progress actually come from?
And the answer, according to the deep dive source material, is trial and error. But the author is very specific, not just random flailing around, rational trial and error.
This is a crucial distinction to make. When we hear the phrase trial and error, we usually picture chaos.
Yeah, we think of a monkey hitting random keys on a typewriter.
Exactly, pure randomness. But the source argues that effective trial and error is actually highly structured and deeply rational. It's fundamentally about information harvesting.
Information harvesting. He uses a really great everyday analogy for this, looking for a lost wallet.
Right. Let's play this out because it perfectly illustrates the concept. You lose your wallet in your living room. Do you just walk around randomly looking at the ceiling, then the floor, then the ceiling again?
No, of course not. I look on the coffee table. If it's not there, I look under the sofa.
And if you look under the sofa and it's not there, do you immediately look under the sofa a second time?
No, I know it's not there. I've checked that spot off the list.
Exactly. You have gained valuable information. Finding nothing is not a failure in this context. It is a vital piece of data. The wallet is not in Sector A. This directly increases the mathematical probability that it is in Sector B. You are systematically taming the randomness. You are eliminating the no's to eventually corner the yes.
So failure isn't just a dead end. It's an active step in the search algorithm.
Correct. And to illustrate this concept, working on a massive million-dollar scale, the source tells the story of Greg Stem.
Ah, the shipwreck hunter. Honestly, this is my favorite story in the entire packet.
It's a brilliant real-world example. So Greg Stem is a pioneer in deep ocean marine exploration. And his company famously found a shipwreck called the Black Swan.
Which turned out to be the Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes, right?
Right, a Spanish frigate that sank way back in 1804. And it was carrying an estimated $1 billion in gold and silver coins.
$1 billion sitting on the ocean floor.
$1 billion. Now, the ocean is incredibly vast. You do not find a needle in a haystack of that size by just driving a boat around and guessing.
So how did he do it?
Stem uses a highly rigorous grid system. He divides the target ocean floor into distinct measurable squares. And his strict operational rule is he requires absolute certainty using sonar, using submersibles, that the ship is not in a specific square before he allows the team to move on to the next one.
Wow. So he is literally just harvesting the nose.
Yes. It is tamed and harvested randomness. But here is where the conflict arises. And this connects right back to the empty suits we were just talking about. Stem isn't doing this alone. He has corporate investors. He has accountants evaluating his progress.
And accountants really, really like steady, predictable growth.
Exactly. The source draws this wildly provocative comparison here. It compares the treasure hunter to, well, to a dentist. Or a prostitute.
I noticed that. It's quite the comparison to making a book about economics and risk.
It gets your attention.
Yeah.
But it's fundamentally about cash flow structures. A dentist or a prostitute has a steady, non-scalable income model.
Right. You do the work, you get paid. You fix a tooth, you get a check. It's completely predictable.
Investors absolutely love that kind of predictability. An accountant can look at it and say, great, we made 5% profit this quarter, just like last quarter.
But a treasure hunter's cash flow.
It's incredibly lumpy. You might go 3 solid years spending millions and millions of dollars on fuel, boats, sonar equipment, and crew salaries, and finding absolutely nothing.
Just crossing squares off a map.
Right, so your revenue is literally zero. Your expenses are massive. To a traditional accountant looking at a quarterly spreadsheet, you are failing spectacularly. You are bleeding money.
But to the hunter, to Stem, you aren't failing at all. You are making progress. You are eliminating squares. You are investing capital into acquiring information.
Precisely. The financial loss on the spreadsheet is actually an investment in the search. But modern corporate structures, with their obsession with quarterly earnings reports and bureaucratic oversight, they simply cannot handle this risk profile. They panic.
They pull the funding right before you check the final square that actually has the gold.
Exactly. This dynamic perfectly explains why so much true innovation happens in tiny startups or isolated skunkworks projects, and rarely in massive established companies. Big companies are fundamentally designed to be dentists. They want the steady, predictable cash. They simply cannot tolerate the messy search for the wallet.
That makes perfect sense. And this tension between the messy reality of doing things and the clean, organized theory of how things should be done leads us into the core philosophical argument of this entire deep dive.
The 2 types of knowledge.
Yes. The source categorizes all knowledge into 2 distinct types, type 1 and type 2. Let's really unpack these for you listening, because this framework changes how you see the world. So, type 1.
Type 1 is what the author calls apophatic or tacit knowledge. This is essentially know-how. It is the ingrained ability to do something successfully without necessarily being able to articulate or explain how you do it.
Think about riding a bicycle, right?
The classic example. If you asked me to write down the exact mathematical physics of how I balance on a bike, calculating the gyroscopic effect of the wheels, the micro adjustments of my center of gravity, I couldn't even begin to do it.
Very few people could.
But I can hop on a bike and ride it perfectly.
Or cooking. I think of my grandmother. She made the best pasta sauce I've ever had. But if you ask her for the recipe, she'd just wave her hands and say, oh, a little bit of this, a handful of that. You cook it until it smells right.
Exactly. There are no precise measurements. It's intuitive. It is antifragile knowledge. It is learned entirely through doing, through trial and error over years.
Okay, so that's type 1. Now, what is type 2?
Type 2 is academic knowledge. It is codifiable. It is neatly explainable. The source hilariously calls it Harvardifiable knowledge.
Harvardifiable. I love that.
It's the stuff you find in textbooks. It involves rigorous equations, formal laws, and very clear, logical cause and effect narratives.
And the central problem the author is pointing out is that our modern society thinks type 2 is the only kind of knowledge that actually matters.
We completely fetishize it. We assume that if you can't explain a skill in a neat equation or white paper, it's not real knowledge. We ignore our innate biological instincts, our anti-fragile doing, and this obsession leads directly to what the source calls the Baconian linear model of progress.
Named after the philosopher Francis Bacon.
Or at least attributed to his style of thinking, often popularized by people like Terence Keeley. It is the standard, unquestioned model of how human progress works that we are all taught from grade school onwards.
Okay, let's walk through the steps of this model.
Sure, it goes like this.
Academia does pure basic research.
Applied science takes that theoretical research and figures out how it might be useful.
Practical engineers use that applied science to build new technology.
That technology generates wealth and economic growth for society.
So the arrow's progress goes. Academia to science to tech to practice.
Right.
I mean, that sounds totally logical to me. Isn't that exactly how we got things like the smartphone?
It is how we think we got the smartphone.
Yeah.
But the source vigorously argues that, with a very few specific exceptions, this model is historically completely backward.
Backward.
Yes. One of the few real exceptions is the atomic bomb, which really did start with pure theoretical physics on a chalkboard. But for almost everything else, the arrow points the other way.
So practice comes first.
Practice comes first. The tinkering comes first. The rough heuristic, the rule of thumb, comes first.
Give me an example of the arrow pointing the other way.
Let's go back to the steam engine. We did not develop a robust academic theory of thermodynamics and then proudly hand those blueprints to a mechanic to build an engine.
We didn't.
Not at all. Mechanics built rudimentary engines through pure trial and error. They fixed leaks, they tried different sizes of pistons, they blew things up. They just wanted to pump water out of coal mines.
Right.
And then, decades later, academic scientists came along, studied these working engines, and developed the laws of thermodynamics to explain why the engines were already working.
Wow. So the practical engine taught the scientists, not the other way around.
Exactly. There is a great quote in the material. Great geniuses invent their predecessors. Practical innovations create their theoretical ancestry. We essentially rewrite the history books after the fact to make it look like the theory caused the technology.
Because that justifies the massive funding for the theoretical departments.
Precisely. Which brings us, finally, to the title of this entire episode, the central metaphor of the source text, lecturing birds on how to fly.
It is the absolute perfect metaphor for this illusion we've been talking about. Paint the picture for everyone listening.
Okay, imagine a group of men in their 60s. They are bald, they are wearing distinguished black academic robes.
Very serious, guys.
Extremely serious. They are the esteemed professors from the Harvard Department of Ornithology, and they are standing out in a grassy field looking at a flock of birds on the ground.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They are speaking to these birds using incredibly high-level jargon. They have a whiteboard out. They are writing complex aeronautical equations. They are saying, now listen closely, birds. To achieve optimal lift, you must flap your wings at precisely a 30-degree angle of attack, utilizing the Bernoulli principle to create a pressure differential.
And the birds are just looking for worms, being birds.
Right. Eventually, the birds just take off. They fly beautifully up into the sky. And the professors down on the ground immediately start high-fiving each other.
They did it.
They rush back to their Ivy League offices and publish a peer-reviewed report. The birds flew. Our rigorous lecture was a complete success. If we hadn't lectured them on the Bernoulli principle, those birds would have been permanently stuck on the ground.
It's a hilarious image, but it's also really, really pathetic when you think about it.
Yeah.
The source calls this an epiphenomenon, right?
Yes, an epiphenomenon. It's a crucial concept. It means something that occurs alongside an event or accompanies it but doesn't actually cause it. The lecture happened, the flight happened, they occurred at the same time. But there was zero causal link between them.
Because the birds fly simply because they are birds.
They possess type 1 know-how encoded in their biology. They absolutely do not need the type 2 academic lecture.
But the scary part to me is what the author calls the Soviet Harvard illusion. Because we aren't just doing this with birds. We do this with entire global economies.
We do. We look at wealthy, developed nations, the US, the UK, Germany, and we observe two basic facts. One, these countries are very wealthy. Two, these countries have massive, well-funded university systems and produce lots of academic research.
So we automatically conclude, the academic research must be what caused the wealth.
Just exactly like concluding the lecture caused the flight.
Right.
But the author suggests it's far more likely to be the other way around. Because the country is already rich, thanks to centuries of trade, bare-knuckle business, tinkering, and practical on-the-ground innovation, it can simply afford to pay for the Department of Ornithology.
The wealth funds the research as a luxury.
Exactly. The research is a byproduct of the wealth, not the engine creating it.
That is a deeply radical idea. I mean, if you stand up and say that at a cocktail party in Washington, D.C. or London, you are going to get thrown out of the room.
You absolutely will, because it directly threatens the empty suits. It threatens the entire institutional funding model. If you tell a government oversight committee, hey, you know those birds, they'll fly perfectly fine without the lecturer, the lecturers are going to lose their multi-million-dollar grants.
So the lecturers scream, you're killing the birds. If you cut our funding, gravity will take over and the whole sky will fall.
Exactly. They manufacture a crisis to protect their position.
So if the accepted loop of progress theory leading to practice is mostly an illusion, what is the actual real loop of progress according to the source?
The real loop is random tinkering, which leads to heuristics or rough rules of thumb, which leads to practice, which leads to more tinkering.
You search for the wallet.
Yes, you search, you find a trick that happens to work, you use it, you get a little faster at it, and then eventually, maybe 50 years later, a theoretical scientist comes along and writes a paper explaining why your trick works. The theory is just the sports commentator up in the booth. It is not the player on the field.
This whole discussion really forces you to completely rethink how we view causality. How do we actually know what causes what in the world? If we can't trust the expert's lecture, and we obviously can't always trust our own flawed intuition, what tools do we have left to trust?
The source material brings up two really strong analytical tools for cutting through this kind of causal BS. The first is learning to spot epiphenomena in everyday action, and the second is a statistical concept called Granger causality.
Okay, let's start with spotting the epiphenomenon. We use the bird lecture as a funny metaphor, but is there a more mechanical example?
The compass on a ship is a great one. Imagine you are standing on the bridge of a giant, massive ocean liner. You are watching the captain. You see him spin the heavy wooden wheel. Immediately, you see the needle on the magnetic compass swing to the right. And then slowly, you feel the entire massive ship turning to the right.
Okay, I'm with you.
A completely naive observer, someone who knows nothing about how ships work, might look at that sequence of events and think, wow, that tiny little magnetic needle is incredibly powerful. It just pushed a 10,000-ton ship.
But the needle is just reflecting the changing heading. The rudder under the water is what actually turned the ship.
Exactly. The compass is purely an indicator, not a driver. But in fields like economics and history, we constantly confuse the compass for the rudder. We blame the indicator.
Give me an example of that in economics.
Take the concept of greed. Every single time we have a major financial crisis, whether it's 2008, the dot-com bubble, or the Great Depression, what is the immediate narrative everyone repeats?
The bankers got greedy. Unchecked corporate greed caused the market crash.
Right, and the source completely tears this lazy argument apart. He points out that greed is a constant in human nature. It is as old as the poet Virgil. It is quite literally baked into the human operating system.
People have always wanted more money.
Always. People were incredibly greedy in 2007 when the housing market was booming. And they were equally greedy in 2008 when it completely collapsed. You cannot mathematically or logically blame a constant variable like human greed for a sudden variable event like a market crash.
That is such a logic bomb. It's like saying, if I drink a cup of coffee every single morning for 20 years and then one random Tuesday I have a heart attack, I can't rationally say, the coffee caused my heart attack because I drank that exact same coffee on the thousands of days I didn't have a heart attack.
That's a perfect analogy. The source compares it to a mafia don. It's like a mafia boss gets gunned down in the street, and the police report says the cause of death was a lack of vigilance.
No, he died because his rivals shot him with bullets.
Right. The lack of vigilance was maybe a contributing background factor, but the actual structural cause was the bullets. So when pundits and politicians blame greed for a crisis, they are just being intellectually lazy. They are avoiding the hard work of looking for the real structural fragility, the bad financial engineering, the hidden risks that actually caused the system to snap.
So how do we actually find that real structural cause? That's where this Granger causality thing comes in, right? And I'll be honest, when I was reading the prep material and saw the phrase Granger causality, I thought, oh boy, this is going to be incredibly dry math. But it's actually a really practical way to think.
It is very practical. Clive Granger actually won a Nobel Prize in economics for formalizing it. It sounds intimidating, but we can explain it with a very simple farmyard analogy. Think of a rooster and the sunrise.
No, the rooster crows and then the sun comes up.
Right. Now, in any scientific attempt to prove causation, sequence absolutely matters. Event A must happen before event B. So, looking strictly at the timeline, the rooster crows before the sun rises. So, based purely on precedence, does the rooster cause the sunrise?
In a very primitive, superstitious sense, it looks exactly like it does.
That's the first trap. Precedence isn't enough. The second step of Granger causality is the crucial one. You have to look at the delta, the change. You have to virtually remove the A variable and see if the B result changes.
So if you shoot the rooster, does the sun still rise?
Exactly. And does it?
Yes, the sun still rises.
Therefore, mathematically, the rooster does not cause the sunrise. The causal link is broken. The rooster is an epiphenomenon. Now, apply this exact same logic to something complex, like the Federal Reserve.
Oh, this is good.
The economy is struggling. The Fed publicly announces they are cutting interest rates. A few months later, the economy recovers. The newspapers all say, the Fed cut caused the recovery. But did it? Or did the underlying economy naturally start to turn around on its own, and the Fed just quickly cut rates so they could take the credit and look like they were in control?
Or maybe the stock market anticipated that the Fed was going to act, so the recovery actually started happening in the data before the official cut was even made.
Exactly. Granger causality forces you to look really closely at that messy, granular timeline of events. As the philosopher Kierkegaard famously said, life is lived forward but understood backward. We naturally remember the clean, simple narrative, the Fed saved us. We completely smooth over and forget the messy reality where the rooster was actually crowing at random times all night long.
And the final trap we fall into, which distorts our view of reality even more, is cherry picking.
What the source brilliantly calls the tourist brochure effect.
I really love this analogy. It explains so much about how we consume information.
Think about it. When you look at a glossy travel brochure for a tropical island vacation, what do you see in the photos?
Pristine white sand, crystal clear blue water, smiling locals handing you a cocktail with an umbrella in it.
And what do you distinctly not see in the brochure?
The swarm of mosquitoes.
Yeah.
The 2-hour traffic jams getting to the resort. The loud construction noise right next to your hotel balcony. The extreme poverty just a mile down the road.
Exactly. The photos in the brochure are technically true, that white sand beach really does exist, but it is a highly biased, cherry-picked slice of the whole truth. The source argues that modern academia and institutional science function exactly like a tourist brochure.
Because researchers only publish their successes.
Right. They proudly publish papers saying, we found a statistically significant correlation, or we successfully cured the disease in the lab rat, but they almost never publish their thousands of failures.
You never see a headline that says, we spent 3 years trying this experimental drug and literally nothing happened.
Exactly. So when we, the public, or even other scientists, look at the compiled body of scientific literature, we are only seeing the white sand beaches. We are completely blind to the mosquitoes and the traffic jams.
So we get a massively distorted view of how effective these Type 2 complex academic methods actually are.
The author gives a great, very pointed example involving string theory and mathematics. He mentions a very brilliant mathematician named Michael Atiyah. Atiyah once gave a speech listing all the wonderful ways advanced mathematics has helped human society, things like optimizing traffic signals, structural engineering, encryption.
And what's wrong with that? That sounds true.
It is true. But the source asks a vital question. Where is the corresponding list of all the ways advanced mathematics has severely hurt society?
Oh, right. Like the insanely complex financial models that completely blew up the global economy in 2008.
Precisely. Those mathematical models gave bankers completely false confidence. They cloaked massive risks in the language of science. They were type 2, theoretical knowledge, dangerously pretending to be type 1, practical wisdom. But nobody in academia ever writes a peer-reviewed paper titled, "How My Beautiful Math Equation Destroyed a Teacher's Pension Fund."
We really need a formal journal of failed mathematics.
We do. We desperately need to see the mosquitoes in the brochure if we're going to understand reality.
So bringing this all back to where we started our journey today, the wheel on the suitcase, the Mayan toys, the camel replacing the wagon, it feels like the unifying theme woven through all of this source material is a desperate need for intellectual humility.
Humility and a very healthy dose of skepticism. We need to actively stop worshiping complexity just for the sake of complexity. We need to stop blindly assuming that because something is Harvardifiable because it comes with equations and jargon, that it is automatically true or useful.
And we need to give way more respect to the doer, the person with the dirty hands, the mechanic tinkering out in the garage, the tired traveler who just decides to screw some casters onto the bottom of a suitcase, even if they can't write a PhD dissertation explaining the physics of rolling friction.
The source ends the chapter with a really beautiful, quiet image that sums this up perfectly. The author describes just sitting and looking at a simple porcelain coffee cup.
Yes, I really like that ending.
He looks at this incredibly simple, everyday object, a cup with a handle, and he realizes something profound. He realizes that the simpler and more elegant a physical discovery is, the less equipped our complicated, modern, hyper-academic minds are to figure it out. We have successfully built a civilization capable of running quantum supercomputers, but we routinely struggle to see the genius of the coffee cup.
It really leaves you with a provocative thought to chew on, something I think everyone listening should ask themselves this week. The source asks, how many simple, trivially simple heuristic solutions, just like the wheel on the suitcase, are currently sitting right in front of us, looking at us and laughing, while we completely ignore them because we are too busy looking for complex theories?
That is the defining question. What is the invisible wheel in your specific industry right now? What is the obvious low-tech solution you are actively missing because you are trying too hard to sound smart?
I'll tell you, I am going to be looking at absolutely everything differently this week. My kitchen appliances, my car, the way I organize my emails. I'm going to be relentlessly looking for that missing wheel.
And just remember, if you ever see a bird flying beautifully through the air, don't ask the professors for their lecture notes. Just enjoy watching the bird fly.
That's great advice. Thank you for diving deep with us today. This is a truly fascinating one. Keep tinkering, keep looking for those lost wallets under the sofa, and we will see you next time.